Hey everyone, welcome to the new year. Today's interview is about human resources and what this means and what it can mean in the new year. So if you are in medical affairs, if you are in MSL, if you care about promotion, if you care about the life sciences industry, you're probably going to care about today's discussion because it's affecting you every single day. Our guest today, we've had him before. He's a career HR executive who spent 27 years at Merck Company. He's now an independent HR consultant working with small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofits to help improve business performance and the work environment. He can be reached at David C. Howe at Comcast.net. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Darshan Talks live stream, and I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. This is David Howe. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. I do have to say I'm an attorney, I'm not your attorney. I'm a pharmacist, I'm not your pharmacist. And then I'm going to have a bunch of disclaimers, like these are not our opinions. These are our opinions, not necessarily those of our clients or employers. We would love for you to leave a comment, share, and subscribe. Feel free to ask our guest questions. He would love that as well. You can always reach me on Twitter at DarshanTalks, or just go to our website at DarshanTalks.com. Additionally, you can also reach David, and again, I'm flashing this across the screen, at David C. Howe at Comcast.net. Hey, David, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Darshan, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's been a few months since we last talked, but it's been a very busy few months, and you're the first guest of 2022. Awesome. So it's good to have you.
Yeah.
Let's start with the basics. We're talking about 2022. What does it bring? What does it mean? And if I am if I am trying to figure out what my 2022 looks like, how do I decide how to aim for the next rung? How do I think about growth, and how do I take myself to that next level?
Yeah, well, if any of us can figure out what to expect in 2022, we should invest in whatever our idea is, because I think none of us really know. The last 2 years have shown that nobody can really predict what's going to happen next. I think you mentioned an interesting word there about growth and readiness and so forth. I think what we all can do and need to do, and what we've learned to do over the last 2 years, is be ready for change, and to prepare ourselves to be resilient and to adapt through having a mindset ready for taking on change and ready to continue forward, or even, if possible, to flourish. What's really struck me over the last couple of years is how some organizations have really actually flourished during the challenging times that we've had. So if I have advice for folks for 2022, it's figure out how to be ready for more change, and to prepare yourself, to sort of ground yourself and be well, and just look for opportunities where where you have a choice between looking at something glass half empty and glass half full. Look at the glass half full and figure out how to fill it up further.
So I love the advice, which is very, I mean, to some people it may seem kumbaya, but the fact is that it's very, very grounded in reality, in that it's affecting every single person right now, and we have to be thinking about change. My question for you is, how is this affected by the Great Resignation? And what I'm talking about is the fact that people are now changing jobs, and people are saying, I want more opportunities. What have been the big reasons that, in your experience recently, that people are changing jobs? And what is it that people are looking for nowadays? And how do you, as part of this growth process, imbue those changes so you can find that next job that makes sense for you?
Yeah, well, I think people are opting for different careers or different jobs because they've gotten a taste of, we sort of broke the frame, right? Everything changed in March of 2020, and people got a taste of what a different life could look like. If you were working in a very grueling profession, you realize that you can have a life that's different from that. Or if you were commuting an hour or more each way every day, you realize what it was like not to have to do that. So I think people are taking more control over the choices that they have and not settling for what used to be the norm, right? We just accepted it because it was the way it had always been. And people are now questioning those things and looking for things that are where they can contribute their gifts, but not have to take some of the downsides that we used to accept.
But do you think that that's going to hinder growth?
I don't know. I mean, I think it certainly is a challenge for. I'm a consultant. I work with a number of different clients, and several of those clients are having a big challenge with people leaving or having higher expectations when they get hired, or expecting to have a certain sort of work-life situation if they're going to accept a new role. So I think it forces organizations to rethink what their expectations or what their deal is with the employees that they have. I'm working with one client right now who has gone almost entirely virtual since the start of the pandemic and has been pretty successful doing that. Their work, it's a nonprofit organization, so they're not all about the money that they make, but they've been delivering great services. They've been getting grants. They've been doing the kinds of things that they need to do. What they're missing is sort of some of the camaraderie and the community building. They've hired probably a quarter or a third of their workforce in the last 2 years. And those people haven't been part of an organization that feels the same kind of community because they haven't been able to get together. So we're working on what's an appropriate balance of flexibility and letting people do their work, where and when it's best for them to do it, balancing that with a desire to have some amount of integration or collaboration or in-person community building and relationship building. And that's a tough balance to get. And then on top of that, with the Delta wave and then coming down and then the Omicron wave, and at some point that'll go down, the sands are shifting under their feet in terms of what's sort of appropriate from a health point of view at any given point in time. So it's hard to get sort of an established expectation set. Go ahead.
No, so I found it really interesting that you talked about this idea that people have been focused on work-life balance, and people are now questioning what the status quo is. I feel like I've had that for my entire professional career. And the reason I've had that is because I'm an entrepreneur and I chose what life I wanted. Mm-hmm. You are now an entrepreneur choosing the life you want. Do you foresee a future where it's not tied to employment, but tied to teams of consultants coming together, addressing a problem, and then moving on to other problems? Or do you think that there's inherently a significant value in having a core team that grows and expands and is still employment based?
Well, so back to your, these are our opinions, and
of course.
My personal opinion is that there is a great deal of value in having a core team working together on a common mission that brings some sense of history and continuity and customer relationships. I think that there's value in that, and I think that those groups can be complemented by people like you and me, or people who are ad hoc employees or gig workers or whatever. But I wouldn't foresee entire organizations made up of temporary, part-time, here for a project and then gone kind of folks. Because I think then you lose the continuity and the sort of mission and the esprit de corps that you get when you're part of a team. So do you think that we will, at least in the near to medium term, be looking at a core group that has a history of organization, and then teams coming together? And the reason I asked that question is I'm thinking more about, for me, one of the more famous examples was Endo Pharmaceuticals, which was known to be a virtual pharmaceutical company. Mm-hmm. And
I've worked with other medical device companies who are primarily virtual. So I'm wondering whether the virtuality was based on, we don't need you to be on site, but we need you to have history, or if it was based on, I need specific skill sets, and virtuality is how I get there. And my question to you is, what have you seen, and where do you sort of see that future going?
Yeah. I think that there's a power in both, right? You get the greatest power when you've got a set of people who are sort of the core group that are maintaining continuity, that are ensuring that we're staying true to our strategy and our mission, and who maintain customer relationships and so forth. I think where we got into a little bit too far that direction back in the past was when we expected all of those people to be in the same place at the same time. And with technology, even before COVID, we had the opportunity to tap into talent anywhere in the world.
Right.
And that opened up a huge opportunity where we could get diversity of thought. We could get relationships that we otherwise wouldn't have had, that go beyond the core group of people maybe that might be at the headquarters organization, and tap into skill sets, sometimes at a lower cost, all of those things, right? So there's great value in virtuality, but you can't, I think if you swing too far, I think you could swing too far if you try to go purely virtual. I know that there are organizations that are trying to do that. I think we will find out over time how successful those organizations are.
Yeah.
If I'm a betting person, I bet that a purely virtual organization is going to struggle.
Very interesting. So let's explore that idea of virtuality. For the most part, it's been based on this idea that my employees who are my core group are going to be based. For example, we're both in the Philadelphia area. They're primarily going to be based in the Philadelphia area. We can cause meetings if we need to. But as you're pointing out, and as I think it was Tom Friedman pointed out, the world is flat, and he wrote that book literally 20 years ago. But we've really reached that point of the world is flat. There's no reason this conversation, an important conversation, cannot take place with someone from on the other side of the world. If that's true, do you foresee global teams working? And I know it happens to a certain extent, but are you going to see more of that, where national borders stop mattering as much, and skill sets are what defines it? And the implication of that, which is rising of wages in other countries and lowering of wages in the U.S. And what are the implications of that?
I'm quite aligned with what you're talking about. I think that we'll see more and more collaboration across geographies, or being more boundaryless, whether that's different parts of the country or whether that's other countries. And I do think that that'll sort of democratize things over time across the world. I think that we still have countries with vastly different resources and educational systems and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Governmental control, restrictions, and so forth. So it's not going to be everybody on a level playing field, I don't think, anytime soon.
Right.
But I do think that there's some of that going on, and I think that that's probably a source of some of the tensions that we have in this country, as the differences between the haves and the haves not gets wider and wider, and over time. What you're talking about is I think one of the reasons that happens.
So I have Tier writing in, pharma and CR have taken advantage of remote skilled workers for a decade, at least bringing in the best talent from across the globe. While it's cumbersome at times with time zone differences, I believe this diversity and skill share is the future of work. I 100% agree with her. But here's my question.
Yeah.
What happens if we now start saying, you know what? I could get Darshan and pay him X amount, or there's a guy sitting in Ukraine who I can train, and he'll now work at 1/3 the cost, or 1/6 the cost.
Right.
And what are the implications of that? And while I think it's amazing to use those resources, do you think that that is the direction we'll go? And yes, I don't think it's going to happen in 5 years, but I can see an argument for 10 to 15 years. And we've seen parts of that, like Tia just mentioned, in the context of pharma and CROs. You're seeing that. You've seen that in tech as well. But what is your take? Do you think that that's too much of the sky is falling?
I think it will continue to move that direction. The question is how far, how fast. Right. And then you've got to look at different kinds of jobs. There are jobs that lend themselves to that, knowledge workers, or programmers, or people whose outputs can be transmitted through technology. That's going to work for. If you've got a manufacturing organization, or if you're a restaurant, or right. There are certain things that need to be done in a certain location, and you're not going to be able to, unless you ship the entire manufacturing organization to another country, you're not going to have this sort of cross-border movement or teamwork in those kinds of things. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. I just think it becomes, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. But I think it does move the direction that you and Tia are talking about, with more of that. And I think that that's a good thing. To what she said, you get more diversity of thought. You get people working with others who are unlike them, which you inherently learn from and grow from, in my view. So I've been a big fan of that. I led a number of global teams when I was at Merck, and those were the best teams I ever worked with, because it was so much fun and so interesting to work cross-culturally and get different perspectives. And by working together from those different perspectives, we could definitely create better outputs than a more homogeneous team back at home.
Which really raises the question: how important is culture if we're doing this globally and remotely? I mean, one of the important things you talked about early on was the value of a company's culture. Mm-hmm. What I'm adding to that is the layer of a country's culture. Mm-hmm. And does a company's culture almost outweigh a country's culture when you're talking about cross-border working? In your experience, you've done this, Tia's done this, and she's pointing out, I love working on global teams. You've done this, I've done this, Tia's done this. But when you're working with global players, do you find that you have to bring them on board with the company culture, or they already have a certain version of the company culture, and it's less important than, say, understanding how we do things in the US, if you will?
Yes. So, my big experience with this was at Merck, which is a huge, global organization. My clients right now are much smaller and much more local. But at Merck, as we brought people into the organization, sort of irrespective of what country they were in, there is a very strong company culture around ethics, around doing things for the patient, around sort of scientific rigor, and database decision making and collaboration and things of that nature. And that is true irrespective of what country you're in. So that may look different in Brazil versus India versus Japan. Right. But it may exhibit differently. But the people that I got to work with across all of those countries and many more kind of all had that same ethic around what's important here at Merck. So I think that you get the benefits of folks from other country cultures when you can sort of combine the country culture with the right person from that country working at that organization. Because, believe me, if you're Apple, you're looking for a different kind of an employee than if you're Merck, even in any country. So there's that, people can join the organizations where they fit right. Mm-hmm. And then they bring with them the country culture that they came from, if that makes sense.
It does. And it speaks to the value and the importance of having a strong company culture. So in these times, you mentioned this earlier, I'm sort of circling back to the conversation you already had. In these times when people are not connecting to the company culture, how are companies, how are companies sort of going, we need to create that central ethos? Is it having remote meetings? And I mean, I zone out during remote meetings that don't necessarily tie me in. Yeah. So how are companies addressing this need?
That's the struggle. I don't think we've figured that out yet.
Okay.
So I'll give you my personal view. I think that with a lot of kinds of work, a lot of it can be done remotely. We've proved that over the last 2 years. So certain kinds of work, you can do it remotely. If you're working in a hospital, you're probably not doing that remotely. But
right.
What you
actually, some of that is being done remotely as well, by the way. But yeah,
some of that is, yes. But yeah, okay, fair enough. But I've built my entire consulting practice remotely, so
right.
The things I do can be done that way. That said, when we've put together in-person sessions on something important with my clients, those interactions have been so much higher quality than anything we could have done online. And so I think what companies and organizations and even individual people need to think about is what's the opportunity cost if I'm doing everything remotely? What am I missing out on? And there, in my view, is a definite value in getting together with people in person when that interaction is important. Right. If when we're doing a tutorial like this, it can be done entirely remotely. When we're having an average staff meeting, that can be done remotely. But if we need to do a strategic planning session, we better be in person with each other. Or when we really need to work on team dynamics, this is the kind of stuff I do. Like, that is so much better when you're in person, eye to eye. You can, pair off, go to different parts of the room, have deep discussions. And, Zoom rooms, they do that okay, but it's not the same thing. So I encourage everybody to think about who are the people that I need to have strong relationships with. What are the important conversations that I need to have, and to try to find a way to do those where it makes sense to try to do those in person, and everything else you can do online. But the being in person 100% of the time isn't necessary, and being online 100% of the time over time, in my view, is isolating, and you won't have as much success or as much enjoyment, in my view, if that's your entire existence.
Speaking of strategy and company culture, Tia has a question for you. In global teams, hierarchical structures are often an issue. In the US, we seem to be more of a flat model of leadership. How do you see this being addressed, I assume, in the context of global teams?
Yeah. So the US is a very hierarchical kind of culture.
No, I think she's actually saying the US is more flat. Now, has that been different for you?
It depends on where you are in the world. The important thing, in my view, is to agree as a team on how we're going to work together, and to listen to each other. So, one of the key things that I learned when I started working with global teams is to enter each conversation with inquiry, not with advocacy or saying what I think is the right thing to do, but to ask questions and to uncover from the other person their perceptions. And if the team leaders do that, the team's going to be just fine. I don't know if that answers Tia's question or not.
I think it does to a certain extent, but I'm going to challenge you on that. I have some dealings in India. I grew up in India, and some of the people I worked with specifically came out and said, "Look, we don't need questions. We want the answer. What is it that you want us to do?" Because it's very, very, give me the answer, I will perform the task. Yeah. Obviously, that may have just been my experience. But my question for you is, and again, it's not just India. I know people in the US as well who want the answer. On the other hand, from a strategic viewpoint, I know I 100% agree with you. I want to understand the reason you're asking the question in the first place, because that helps me understand the answer. But how do you deal with people going, I don't need the jibber jabber, I need the answer?
The point I'm trying to make, I think, is let's talk about how we're going to work together before we try to work together. And then if the way that we're going to work together is you want me to tell you what to do and you'll do it, we can talk that through. It's not going to be my preferred way. But if that's the way that we have to interact with each other to get stuff done, then we'll understand that and we can do it. Maybe another avenue or another aspect of what I'm trying to say is Americans can come across as very pushy, as very egocentric, and as very culturally arrogant. Right. And so as an American, I need to be aware of that. And that's the impression that I'm going to give the moment I walk in a room, irrespective of what my intentions are. So I try to counteract that by being more open and interested in drawing other people out. And I've found that to be quite effective.
Tia has a response for you. Example, not having access to C-suite and having many steps in between. While the US, especially millennials, are very collaborative at all levels, it's very different from the Asian companies, for example.
Yeah.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's unusual for a Asian company to have access to the C-suite. I in fact, you set it up so that becomes the case. You're shielded from those conversations. Right. On the other hand, in the US, I don't know whether it's the fact that I come in at a different level or the fact that that's just what the culture is. You have access to the CEO if you really, really need to. Obviously, that's not as easy at like a Pfizer or Merck, but smaller companies, absolutely.
Yep.
How do you see that playing out?
So I have a funny anecdote. When I was at Merck, there was a sort of entry-level, high-potential global program that I had responsibility. It's a development program that I had responsibility to run. And that gave me exposure actually to not somebody that was on that program, but somebody who's an intern. And he wrote to the CEO and asked for a meeting and got it. Like, I couldn't believe it. Yeah, Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck, met with this intern for at least a half hour, and they chatted about, what the intern thought was important, I guess.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. That just floored me. So you're absolutely right that particularly younger employees some of them don't seem to have any issue kind of reaching out like that. I personally think that organizations that are more fluid and people have access to more, if you're junior, more senior levels, and more senior people have access to people at more junior levels, I think that's a healthy thing if it's managed appropriately, if it's not willy-nilly, and if they're not like going around management chains and things of that nature. Right. But the more that we get exposure to each other, I think the more effective we're going to be. If there's important information or perspectives, senior leaders getting exposure to frontline employees and what they're facing, that's helpful. They shouldn't have to go through 6 layers of management in order to get that input. So I personally like the style of having things be a little bit more informal, have easier access. It could be vertical, it could be horizontal in the organization. If there's something that you need to do or information that you need to share, you should be able to go to the point where that's going to be relevant. And I think that organizations that behave that way are going to be more healthy, which, then to Tia's point, there are differences across cultures. And I do think that that's a strength of the American culture in this case.
So I'm going to ask, we're already well past time, but I'm going to ask this question that goes along with it. Do you think in that specific instance, it was due to who Ken is, who's known to be a very, very personable individual who does make himself available? Or was that a Merck internal culture to make the CEO available to an intern? And what sort of went out?
It's a Ken thing. That was unusual at Merck, and there would be other senior leaders that wouldn't have responded the same way.
Very, 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 very cool. I mean, kudos to Ken. He retired, as some people may know. So, how long ago? That was last year, wasn't it? I can't tell. Yeah. Time's just become a fictional thing for me at this point. But
after a great run, Yeah.
Exactly. Good for him. As you know, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, how can people reach you?
You had put up my email before. It's davidchow@comcast.net.
Very, very cool. I'm going to ask you one last question because we've gone well over time.
Yep.
But what is something most people don't know about you?
Something that people don't know. So I was quite an outdoorsman when I was young, when I was in high school. I grew up in Minnesota and went to a YMCA wilderness camp in northern Minnesota. And at a certain point, as you got older, when you were in high school, you had to be invited back for longer and longer trips. And so after my senior year in high school, I did a 46-day canoeing trip in the Northwest Territories of Canada, up above the tree line up in the tundra.
Incredible.
Yeah. And there was one point during that trip for 25 days, there were 6 of us on the trip, a counselor and 5 campers. For 25 days, we didn't see another person. So that was way out there in the middle of nowhere. And we actually had to be rescued by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police because we never made it to where we were supposed to go to, which is Baker Lake, Northwest Territories. And so Baker Lake is a big lake. If you look at a map, you'll actually see it. And the Baker Lake town is on the northern shore. And we came in on a river on the southern shore, and the wind was there was too much wind. There were no trees and all that kind of stuff, and we couldn't make our way across the lake. So they had to come in their little, a biplane with with pontoons on it to come rescue us from the side of the lake and bring us home. So that's my big story.
That's a hell of a story. That's very Bear Grylls.
Yes.
I mean, I find the idea of a super big shot in Merck with a history of pharma to have this kind of background to be awesome. Like it's so cool to see this side of people. So thank you so much again. This was amazing. Any last comments before we call out?
Just I'm wishing everybody a wonderful 2022. I'm hoping that this will be a really good year where we turn a corner and start coming out of the tunnel. At the end of the day, we can't bank on that. That's where we started this conversation. So take care of yourself. Make sure that you're living in a way that you can sustain with your family, yourself, your health, your mental health, and just be ready for whatever comes. And we'll all get through it together.
That's awesome. Thank you again. This was great having you on, David. Thank you again.
My pleasure.